Hello and welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez welcoming you back to our ongoing series of discussions around the topic of leadership. And today I have the very great honour to be joined by a colleague of mine that I have not worked with for at least a decade and a half, maybe more. And it's been great to catch up with this individual. But before we get into the podcast proper, I'd just like to again thank the sponsor of the podcast, Sydney Fish Markets, for their ongoing support. So let's get things started. Hey, so today's guest has a very interesting background in terms of the world of leadership, and her current role is as the managing director of Renton and Co. She was previously the manager of community engagement with the City of Melbourne, and was also in the role of president of the IAP2 International Association for Public Participation. Can I welcome to the podcast Desley Renton? How are you, Desley?
Hello, Eric. I'm very well, thank you.
Thank you for joining me today. And let's get things started where I always start the podcast. In which industry was your first leadership role, and why did you take that on?
Right, and I'm casting back to when I was very young, actually. I was in my early 20s, Eric, living in Cairns and a community worker in a women's refuge. And I got the opportunity to apply for and got the role of manager of a women's information service, which was a great honour at my age, and I stepped over quite a lot of other people to get that role. I was very supported at the time by some mentors in going for that position. It was a heady time in the women's movement in Queensland, where funding was starting to come through for these kind of services under the banner of the Office of the Status of Women. So it was a great privilege to be part of that. And I was motivated because I was a young, passionate feminist. You know, I was politically driven. I had things to say and things that I wanted to achieve. And so being given the opportunity to be leading that was fantastic. It was a big learning curve, I have to say. I hadn't done any great media before, or I was a spokesperson. So I learned a lot in the first year or two in that position.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Desley. So drawing on that experience and the experiences outlined in the introduction there, particularly drawing on your past leadership roles, do you see a difference between the function of leadership and management?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And the first thing I thought about when I saw this question was, the internal surveys that are done in organisations, particularly in government. And in my experience, they uniformly deliver a result that middle management is sort of the blocking point, is the weak link in the chain in organisations. And I'm reflecting upon one that I worked for, and there would have been 30 managers, and I'd suggest that only 3 of those would have been regarded as leaders. And I think the difference is, someone in a management role has a responsibility. It's a procedural kind of role. At the end of the day, it's about maintaining things. It's a timeliness. It's reporting and budgeting, and it's a status quo kind of a role. And a leadership role is really a more strategic take on things. I would expect in a leadership role you are providing some inspiration, and you're curious and you're challenging and you're pushing boundaries, just as some essential differences. You're bringing out the best in others as well. You're providing lots of opportunities for others to shine.
Sure. And just if you'll indulge me a little bit, just unpacking that response about identifying who was a leader amongst many managers that you work with in the organisation, that sprung to mind when you responded just then. My question is, what did you see that helped to help those leaders that you saw manage those teams, or get people to be committed to working in teams under those people? Because a lot of what's being brought up in the podcast previously is really about it's the leader, but it's also about the lead. So can you talk about, in your experience, of what you've seen in terms of the team connection?
Yes. Look, I think a good leader does have a confident and has a healthy set of values, if you like understands where they want to go. They're committed. I'm trying to find the right word here. It's intuitive to them. They know where they want to take things. They've got a conviction about it, if you like. And I think that builds confidence in others. I think others will follow and work very hard for leaders who they feel know where they want to go and what they are aiming to achieve, and have a deep sense of continuity about that inside of themselves. So they walk the talk. They are what they say they are. And they're prepared to take a stand for it too, Eric. You know, it sort of links to one of your other questions about, you know, what's hard about being a leader. I think it is about having that kind of conviction is challenging sometimes for leaders.
Sure, and I guess that then resonates too. If you can't put that almost a degree of trust in the leader, then followers aren't going to be motivated to do what the leader or the manager is asking them to do, because you can be in a position where you're not formally designated a leader, but you have those characteristics of leadership, and that's often some of the distinction that's been made in previous podcasts, is that you can have leadership traits in both designated leaders and those that are in managerial other positions that don't necessarily have the title.
Yes. Do you know, I do see, and I hope I am a leader like this as well, where you are committed to understanding another person's values and strengths, and it's your task to make that shine, to bring out the best in that individual. You know, there is a nurturing role, I think, for a leader to do that. I mean, gosh, Eric, people spend a lot of time at work. You know, some people, you see more of your colleagues than you do of your spouse. So it needs to be a good place. It needs to be a place that people are coming to where they feel valued, they feel like they're making a meaningful contribution to something.
That's an excellent point, and I could not agree more. So let's segue into the next question, which is about your personal style, I guess, leadership style. How do you, when you make an error or identify a mistake, how do you engage with that as part of being a leader?
Yes, and it's when I reflect upon the mistakes, it's often hard to know you're making a mistake at the time. It's in hindsight, isn't it, that you can see that it's a mistake. I think you have to own up to those things. I think you have to be transparent and honest about it. And when I think of the best leaders, they do have those excellent communication skills, and you know, what you see is what you get in that person, and owning up to the mistake, unpacking it with the team, with others. You know, what went wrong, what happened, what led us down that path or led me down that path, and what can we take away from it? You know, what learning from your mistakes. I know it sounds like a cliche, but you know, I reflect upon something that happened when I was the IAP2 International President, and I was very convicted at the time about some change that needed to happen, and I had a tremendous backlash to it because I went in way too fast and didn't bring enough people along with me on the journey. So that stayed with me forever and a day, that lesson, I can tell you. Because you can be it can be very personal as well.
Yeah, there is some of that, and again, thank you for sharing that. But I guess it's also leaders are identified and remunerated and expected to take some risks. And so if you thought you were ready to go and you pulled the trigger to do what it is that you needed to do, and in hindsight, you think you could have done better. I mean, if we were to function like that all the time, you'd never get anything done because you'd always second guess yourself around whether or not you should move forward to something. And I know that's always a context specific thing, and it depends on the role, but still, yeah, I wouldn't, it's easy for me to say because I wasn't there when it happened, but sometimes you've got to let that stuff go. And like you said, if you can learn from that, and if the biggest thing you can take away is I need to take people more on big decisions, and that's something that's a good learning. I mean, there's always that sting in the tail of, nobody likes to be pointed out that they've done something incorrect or taken the wrong pathway. But, it's difficult as a leader because sometimes you've got to let a bit of that ego go and take the hit and then move on and do better.
Yes, and I think you have to accept it as part of the way of the world too, Eric. I mean, look at all the thinking around agile, and it's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes. And I did learn that lesson at LGAQ, where I had a manager who was wonderful when I made a mistake, and I was expecting a completely different reaction from her, and I thought, gee, that's really good leadership. That's not just good management. I've learnt that lesson without having to be reprimanded for it. I think
sorry, you go.
I think good leaders can be good managers too, but not all managers are good leaders. So.
Yeah, no, agreed. And for those listening, the acronym LGAQ stands for the Local Government Association of Queensland, of which I spent some time working there in a great place to work. And from memory, I think we shared the same manager when we were there.
Yes, I think so.
Yep.
Maybe at different times, but it was a great place to work. And the thing that stands out for me about that environment was that there was a very clear expectation that we were leaders. I mean, the industry itself was a leadership industry. We were an advocate industry. And there was a freedom to innovate. I never, ever felt that I was held back on what I could do or say or who I could meet with, because I was trusted in me that I knew my stuff and I knew what I was talking about, and I would represent the organisation in a professional way. So it was a really great environment to test one's leadership.
Yeah, no, I very much agree. So you touched on this before. What's the most difficult part about being a leader, Desley?
I think it can be exhausting. Leaders, in my experience, drivers, you need to be a good motivator of others. When the going gets tough, you need to be the one still sort of holding the flag for everybody. People look to you for that kind of inspiration. So that can be, I think you need to be able to step up and be really objective about things and not bury yourself down in it, because you just won't sleep at night if you do. So having that balance is important, but maintaining the drive. I think it's also about being, it's tough sometimes being the voice of, I talked before about the voice of principle, or having a consistent set of values, and maintaining that is, there's a lot of inward kind of reflection required for that, which I think is helped and supported with good mentoring and having good people around you.
Yeah, and you've mentioned it a few times, so I won't let you go without asking a follow-up on this. So values-based leadership is important to you, yes?
Yes, it is, absolutely. I look for it in others. I think it provides consistency. When people have got a values framework that is respected, you can win friends and influence people. You really can. And
sure. And what does in you don't have to give me a model here, but what would be the pillars of what you would see as values-based leadership from your experience, Desley?
An inherent belief in the potential of people, a belief that you don't, cutting corners for the sake of it is not an appropriate thing to do. I can think of many occasions, Eric, where I've been painted into a corner, really, in an organisation because somebody wanted, for example, a quick and dirty kind of process around something. Maybe it's community engagement, for example. And a values-based approach to that would be to say that's not coherent with the organisation's direction and values, and it's a risk, in fact, to us to do that. And I've had to have many of those conversations with people over the years, and I've had to draw on my own value set very heavily to do that.
Wow. Okay. And so thank you again for sharing that, because that term values-based leadership has come up in a couple of other podcasts, and I haven't done my due diligence by asking the question, well, what do you mean by that? So thank you for sharing that. So let's move on to something a bit more positive than the difficulties of leadership. How do you measure success as a leader?
I think that a good leader is has a very supportive team, has people that will work very hard for them and for their vision. They are, are loyal. There is a loyalty to those people who are good leaders. They're effective, actually delivering. Things are happening. Things are changing. When I started at the City of Melbourne, I remember saying in my initial interview, in 5 years' time, we will be recognised as the leader organisation in the practice of community engagement. And we were, Eric. I mean, we won, not that awards are everything, but we had peers acknowledging our excellence in our work. And we were very open and willing to share that with anybody. It was a very collaborative approach. So I think that, people would look at what we were doing and measure us, regard us as successful because of our cutting, our new ground, our delivery.
So look, a couple of questions. I'll put these together because I think they're both part of the same spectrum. So what's your view on the following, that on-the-job experience develops better leaders and that formal education also helps to develop better leaders? Do you have a view on either of those?
Look, I think on-the-job experience is vital for all kinds of things, and certainly for testing one's leadership, for being exposed to situations, perhaps over and over again to build confidence. I think about the roles that I've had in having to, for example, present a business case or an argument to elected members or whoever it is. The more you do it, the better you get at it. So job experience is very, very important. Formal education, I think having your content knowledge is vital. Whether that comes in formal education, mostly it does, I suppose, but it could be a combination of that and lived experience. I think that's vital. So you need to know what you're talking about. You need to understand the sector you're in, whether it's government or community or, the Sydney fish market, so that you've got credibility. But having said that, I can think of some people, Eric, who have not been to university, maybe left school even very early, who are amazing leaders. They've got a lot of confidence, they've got a lot of knowledge, they've acquired that knowledge in, different ways to the formal way. So I think, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
No, you definitely answered the question. And the reason I think, and now I'm using some hindsight here, why I asked the education side of that, just to get views from leaders about this is that in a lot of research, for example, your level of education is often brought up as a demographic that people want to sample. And for a long time, I'm thinking, well, what does it matter what level of education you got to be successful in life? And what I've been finding from exceptionally good leaders, particularly ones that I've interviewed for this podcast, one of them being Ben May, who is an IT guru in my estimation, who finished grade 12 and had a passion for IT and has built a massive business on that on that premise without having formal education. And so there can be examples where it's not necessary to function as a leader. I guess the views on that can vary from, it provides a toolkit, to yes, it's important, but not as important as on-the-job experience. So I think this thing about education floats in that mix of what potentially makes a good leader, irrespective of the formality of it, versus job experience, which is also, if you've got someone in a role that's been in there for 10 years and really understands the ins and outs of their industry, they're going to have insights that others won't have because they've built up that street knowledge of what their industry is about. And unfortunately, you can't get that without having put in the time. And that's, you'll never learn some of the ins and outs of industry in a book. That'll never happen.
Right.
And I understand that. So here's one that hopefully you'll be very interested to hear your view on this. Is leaders are born, not made?
It's a really good question. Just got a quick reflection when I think about the people that I employ, and I've gone through this many, many times over the years, and I employ people to be in leadership roles. I would look at their qualifications, certainly, but the things that would bubble to the top of the list for me are passion for what you're doing, and values. Are you a person who has got a level of self-awareness and reflection? So that's an inherent thing, I think, in people, and are leaders born, not made? I think there's a bit of both, Eric, I reckon. Look at what's happened with the bushfires. There's been a whole lot of people just emerge as leaders in that space.
Yep.
Someone, I've seen people who are, you might think of them as they're the farmer's wife or daughter or whatever, and all of a sudden they're leading this massive movement around buy local or buy from the bush or whatever. They're doing wonderful things. So they've emerged, they've been made out of that adversity or whatever. Did they have the skills there in the first place? Was they born with a sort of set of skills? Possibly. I think there is something about all good leaders in that they have their objective, they're curious, they're strategic, they can see the bigger picture. So that is potentially, that's something that you have as an inherent kind of skill set, and that you're a good communicator. I think it would be tricky for someone to be a really great leader if they had trouble communicating with people. So they may be sort of things you're born with. But, I think it's a bit of both. I'm not sure that I'm answering that.
No, that's fine. And again, there's no right or wrong answers here. It's more what your perspective is. And I tend to agree. I think I said in the middle there with this is that sometimes a situation will bring out the leadership capabilities that people have got that they didn't think they otherwise would have. It's in the context of that situation. So the bushfires is a classic example where you've got a catastrophic event and people either step up and lead, or step up and are prepared to help and follow those that have got a response. Because I guess people's lived experience of these things can range from wanting to fight back to completely going to pieces over the situation. You can understand everything in between those things because it's a catastrophic event. So, yeah, no, I totally agree. And in any natural disaster, those people tend to come up, and those that are existing leaders tend to shine a little bit brighter when they take the reins and say, this is what we've got to do, and they just get in and do. So totally agree. So almost done, Desley. I just wanted to get a couple of views off you on the following. So I'm still in the throes of doing some postgraduate studies myself, and I'm looking at leadership through the lens of the agricultural sector in Australia. And in particular, I'm looking at strategic thinking and foresight as being critical leadership capabilities. What are your views on them? So, and before you respond, I'm not necessarily wanting you to give me a response. I agree with that as part of your study. Yeah. It's more, what do you think of those two as critical leadership capabilities?
I think they are critical leadership capabilities. I do. Your question asks, are they the most critical leadership capabilities? I think they're very, very important, but I think they're up there with other critical capabilities as well, Eric. And I do think good leaders need to be strategic. They need to be curious and objective, and have foresight, like be helping people to think about where they're going, like a direction.
Sure.
I think there's also something else in there about a good leader that is able to, there's a selflessness to it, if that's the right word. There needs to be a humility or something in a good leader that is able to bring out the best in others and not be anxious about somebody else doing something really well and potentially better than you could.
Sure.
A nurturing of talent and expertise in others, and to be constantly open to new ways of doing things. It's something that I have learnt a lot, is not to take what you know for granted in a leadership role. Because exposing yourself to challenges can make you question a whole lot of things that you thought were right and pure. I think you need to stay as a good leader, and I think it's critical that you stay open and objective to change.
Fantastic, thank you for that response. And I thought you would say that, and I think more and more as I'm speaking to different people in different leadership roles and across different industry sectors, that they're kind of saying the same thing, that these are important, maybe not the most important. Some have said they are, some have said they're not, but there's also other capabilities that some people will bring to the fore and say, without this, you can't have the ones that I mentioned, and that's fine. And for me, this is always going to be a nuanced thing, because I think putting on my analysis hat from the discussions I've had to date, I think maybe the industry context in which you work will help you enhance some capabilities more than others. And for me, I think strategic thinking is the one that stands out the most, that irrespective of industry that you're working in, if you can't see the bigger picture, if you can't help to navigate through what that might mean, then without a strategic thinking orientation, that you're not going to be potentially the most effective leader that's out there. From that, and that's based on my experience. So I'll qualify that by saying this is Eric Perez making a view on that, not necessarily that that's what the literature is saying, but that's what I've seen in my own travels, and I'm getting a hint of that from those that I'm speaking to. But definitely industry context is important.
Look, I think that strategic thinking and strategic leadership is, it's crucial. I know in myself, I bring that to the table. One of the things I'm very aware of in bringing that to the table is I need others to support me in, things like day-to-day operations, which just I'm not good at. So I think a good leader is very aware of their strengths as well, and surrounds themselves with the people who can pick up, someone who looks after the spreadsheets and the timesheets and all of those things. When
Sure.
I'm interviewed, people ask me that, what do you need in order to function really well? And it's like, I really need a good PA, because I know that that's not my strength. Let me focus on the big things and let someone else take care of the day-to-day stuff.
And that's more than fair enough. So here's the final question for you, Desley.
Yeah.
What might you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
I would say, don't assume too much. And I still do this now, and I'll give you a quick example, Eric. I was in the West Bank in Palestine last year, running some training on community engagement, and we draw upon this sort of framework that I've been part of for a long time. I believe in it. It didn't mean anything to people there. It had no, it was not relevant. So the assumptions you make, that I've learnt these things and these are true and tested and right, may not be for somebody else. So I do think you need to constantly expose yourself to different environments, whether that's working in Indigenous communities or whatever it is. Don't stay within your comfort zone. Make sure you are brave. You're testing yourself, and having good people around you. I think I think back on some of the mentors I had. Some of the more formal mentoring arrangements were not successful. Some of the informal ones were. And when I think about the best people, they're brave. A mentor of mine currently is Wendy Sarkisian. She's people regard Wendy as difficult. We developed a courage award around her work, and there's this voice in the back of my head when I have my own difficult situation. I think, what would Wendy do? What would she do right now? And so my younger self would be, make sure you've got someone on your radar like that. Test yourself against the people that are making positive inroads into this work. Connect to them in some way. Have a guide. It can be a very lonely experience out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, Desley, look, I appreciate your time and I thank you for your insights. This has been a fantastic discussion, particularly given that we know each other, and this is quite surreal for me, because I've been talking to people on some of these podcasts that I work with when I was a lot younger. And to see how we've tracked and how things have changed around, particularly around our leadership positions, is an interesting roadmap, particularly for someone who's worked with you a long time ago. And yes. So I do appreciate your time. So for those listening, thank you again for joining me on Talking Leadership. You've been listening to the insights on leadership from Desley Renton. Thank you again, Desley.
You're welcome.
And I'll catch everyone else on the next podcast. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today. Just an addendum to this podcast, Desley wanted to review her analysis of values-based leadership. So we re-recorded that element of the discussion, and I've put that as part of the podcast here after the main discussion that we had. Hope you enjoy it. And again, thank you for supporting me in the development of this content. Have a great day, and I'll catch you all on the next podcast. So, Desley, what can you tell me from your perspective is your views on this thing called values-based leadership?
I think a leader who is recognised as having a values-based approach has given time and consideration to thinking through their own ethical framework, if you like, Eric. We make hundreds of decisions every day unconsciously, and a values-based leader would give thought to how those things are connected and you would hope to be consistent in the way they apply their decision making. They are someone who is good at weighing up the different views and opinions. You know, what ought one do? That age-old question, what is the right or best thing to do here, given all of these considerations, is something I would look for in a values-based leader. You know, I was incredibly privileged many years ago to win a fellowship with the then St James Ethics Centre, the Ethics Centre now, and under the stewardship of Dr. Simon Longstaff, and we were challenged constantly on what we stood for. We were probed and tested and exposed to all kinds of things like, you know, voluntary euthanasia, or, you know, should people who are overweight sit on planes next to you, like all kinds of things. And we learned quite quickly that we really didn't have a values-based framework. We had a loose set of ideas. And the values-based framework is about connecting the dots for that and being self-aware about that. So it stands out. I think when you see it, you really recognise it. And it's pretty rare, I think. It's what does make a difference between a good leader and somebody else.